What's going on, guys? It's Danny from Fantasy Stock Exchange here, and today I'll be riding solo talking about my favorite sophomore breakouts in all of fantasy football, going over 3 players in depth, and providing rationale as to why they are in store for huge sophomore years. For this video, we'll be really focusing on players selected in round 5 or later via Underdog Fantasy ADP, avoiding, again, the obvious studs at the top, the cream of the crop, being the top RBs and CD Lamb / Justin Jefferson at the top of this draft. So, in today's focus, as you'll see, will really be on this absurd sophomore class from 2020 and how they're really in store to build off of promising and talented 2020 campaigns as we saw this past year. Make sure, again, if you're watching this video and you want to see these ADPs and you want to take advantage of them, to sign up for Underdog Fantasy using our code FSC at checkout to get free access to both of our draft guides, Dynasty live right now and season long live on July 15th, and a $25 matchback bonus when you sign up. Take advantage of those. And if you guys, again, enjoy content like this and are interested in more, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below and turn notifications on to never miss a beat on an FSC upload. Again, you guys can see on the screen, we're on the road to 5K. Your guys' support means everything in growing this channel. Good? You subscribe? All right, hit that intro. Okay, so let's start off with the first wide receiver of this video. Again, you guys are going to see a common theme. These are 3 wide receivers, maybe at the end a little bit of spice with the quarterback. The first wide receiver is going to be that of the Pittsburgh Steelers, being Chase Claypool with a current ADP of 68 and wide receiver 30 overall. Again, I had to start off with a fellow Canadian ladster himself with Mapletron. Chase Claypool proved his talent from day one with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he's really set to build off of what was an impressive, albeit inconsistent, rookie season, with his total output of 62 receptions for 873 receiving yards and 9 receiving touchdowns, really showing his potential as that Steelers outside receiver. Again, comparatively, this rookie season really rivals that of the beast down in Seattle being DK Metcalf. I mean, we saw Metcalf as a rookie put up a similar stat line of 58 receptions, 900 receiving yards, and 9 receiving touchdowns. And each of them really showed their compared efficiency metrics. 15.5 yards per reception for Metcalf, 14.2 yards per reception for Chase Claypool, being very similar. You're mentioning both the efficiency, the total output, and now we got to talk about the athletic builds. I mean, we're talking about 6'4", 230-pound fast beast on the outside. But when we look at it, what were the main drivers of both of their successes as rookies, with Claypool finishing as a wide receiver 19.5 PPR in 2020 and Metcalf being the wide receiver 32.5 PPR in 2019? And this was really their abilities to work downfield with a package of size and speed and their high touchdown conversion. Now, as soon as people hear high touchdown conversion, they automatically say, well, isn't he in store for negative regression? Can we knock that off when we're talking about 6'4", 230-pound wide receivers? Metcalf's supposed to face regression last year. He only progressed off of what we was at. So we're talking about Claypool. I don't expect the touchdowns to be an issue, simply because he's that type of player to score big plays. So overall, I mean, Claypool really showed that despite being labeled as this raw, inconsistent separator in college, he was immediately put into a role with the Steelers where he was able to contribute. And when thrusted into the limelight, he blossomed into it. So you guys can see on the screen right now, but this is actually a very good separator last year, with his man coverage separation being at a 74th percentile success rate, zone being in 64th, and press being at 80th. Now, what does this really mean? Well, talking about a guy who, in particular, what I take out of this is how impressive he was against man and press, ranking 74th and 80th percentile as a rookie, as I mentioned. And he was also 7th league-wide in yards per route run versus man coverage at 2.82. For reference, DK Metcalf's numbers in 2020 were just absurd in these metrics, but let's keep it into comparison. He was the 88th and 94th percentile in those metrics in 2020. What really intrigues me, though, is that his 2019 rookie season campaign were actually very similar in terms of numbers to what Claypool put up. I mean, we're talking about Metcalf putting up an 85th and a 79th percentile as a rookie versus Claypool being in the 74th and 80th percentile as a rookie. And we really saw this come to fruition given his usage down the field. Claypool actually had a 30.1% deep target percentage, targets being 20 plus yards down the field. And this actual conversion rate was first among wide receivers with 100 plus targets this past season. So not only did he get requisite volume, he was used in the most efficient type of ways out of this entire Steelers offense. So he's being used down the field. We love to see that. We love a guy of his size being able to really work 20 plus yards on the field. But now let's really talk about why he's not going higher in drafts. Despite showing this star talent, we really see that his ADP was knocked down from a potential round 3 or round 4 pick to the current 6th rounder he is. And that's mostly to do with the Steelers' offensive pace after their 11-0 dominant start. So you guys can see on the screen right now, his final 6 games versus his first 10. And you're talking about nearly a 6-point per game regression in those last 6 versus those first 10. But as you guys can see, this was despite the actual volume as a whole going up. This is more so has to do with the fact that the Steelers offense was not scoring at the elite rate it was in those first 10. We're talking about a team that in the first 10 averaged 27.1 points per game versus the last 6 only averaging 19.7. And this had a clear effect on Claypool's overall efficiency and touchdown output, as we see his yards per target drop from 8.4 to 7.1, and his touchdowns dropping from 8 in his first 10 career games to 0.17 per game, or 1 in his final 6. When we're talking about the overall changes this offseason, how does it really affect it? Well, for one thing, those last 6 games, the change in offensive output from 27.1 points per game to 19.7 was actually because of a couple factors, in my opinion. The first one being the lack of balance in this offense. We're talking about an offense that averaged 54.8 rushing yards per game in those final 6 games. And the lack of consistency from Big Ben down the stretch had an impact on Claypool's bottom line. I expect the offense to return to form and Claypool to really reestablish himself as their main deep threat. And a lot of people are going to be watching this, going to be wondering about, well, what about the negatives of Claypool? Because if they're all positives, he wouldn't be currently going in the 6th round. Well, the main arguments going against Chase Claypool and really analyzing the validity of his potential breakout would be the changing dynamic of that Steelers offense. I mean, we're talking about a team that changed offensive coordinators in the offseason to Matt Canada, selected Najee Harris in the 1st round, and in conjunction with this, their commitment to offensive balance, being 656 passing attempts and the 2nd highest pass split last year, should really change going into next year as they want to add more of a run game to complement what Big Ben and these receivers do. However, how does Claypool stand in that wide receiver room? And people are going to ask themselves, people are going to ask everybody, well, how does this really change? If there's a lack of overall volume in the Steelers passing offense, how is that going to affect Claypool's total output? I think Claypool, out of all those Steelers wide receivers, sees the most unaffected change of his role going into 2021 season. I mean, we're talking about a player that, yes, I would take him as the wide receiver 1 out of Pittsburgh going into 2021. And the reason being, you guys can see on the screen, but Claypool himself said that this is actually an easy transition in terms of his role from last year's offense to fitting Matt Canada's role for him in 2021. And as you guys know, Claypool was easily the most efficient of the Steelers wide receivers. And not only is his game an easy transition adapting to Canada, his role is most unaffected by the addition of Najee Harris to the offense, a back who was 2nd in college football in receptions in 2020 and was claimed by many analysts as one of the best receiving talents coming out of the draft at the running back position this year. And you guys can see, but his yards per reception, yards per target, and ADOT of 13.9, 7.9, and 13.8 all easily outpaces 2 Steelers counterparts. As you guys can see, 8.6, 6.5, and 6 for Juju, 6.4 or 10.5, 6.4, and 8.5 with Deontay. And in general, if you're using logic, this is by far the furthest wide receiver on the Steelers down the field. If Najee Harris is doing a lot of his work in or around the line of scrimmage, being design plays and checkdowns, that's not going to affect Claypool's overall target output. That's more so going to affect the guys, the likes of Juju, the likes of Deontay, given the fact that they're more closer in the proximity of where Najee Harris will be. For a guy of this size profile, I mean, we're talking about Chase Claypool, 6'4", 230, the comparative production as a rookie, the overall role in his offense being the most valuable amongst the receivers for the Steelers. Round 6 seems like a very modest price to pay for a receiver that, in my opinion, is hashtag good at football, showed it as a rookie, and despite inconsistent play from his quarterback and his offense, was still able to put up wide receiver 2 numbers for you in 2020. So I expect Claypool to really challenge for another top 20 season. And again, maybe I'm pushing it, but could he have a DK Metcalf level ascension where he's a wide receiver 1, where he's putting up 1,200 yards, 10 touchdowns? I get it. It's expecting a lot, but Mapletron has the opportunity to shine with what should be an improved Steelers offense and what should be one that more heavily features him going into his second year. So I'm all in on the Claypool breakout, and you're currently able to get him as your wide receiver 3 in best ball currently. I'm assuming redraft is probably going to be around the same price. And for that price, I am paying that price of admission any day of the week. I'm getting my tickets. I'm riding the big boy ride. This is Claypool. Let's take it to the top. With that being said, we're going to go on to the wide receiver 2 I'm going to be talking about today, or second wide receiver I'm going to be talking about today. That's going to be Jerry Jeudy of the Denver Broncos. Currently going off the board 80th overall, or the wide receiver 37 off the board. And again, this is really coming off what people would call a quote-unquote down rookie season. I'm confident in saying and projecting that Broncos second-year receiver Jerry Jeudy really takes that next step towards being the wide receiver that the Broncos envisioned with taking at that 15th overall selection in the 2020 draft. Again, he's coming off a 52 for 856 and 3 line, or a PPR wide receiver 47 finish as a rookie. And we really saw that this was a player that was largely affected by poor quarterback play provided to him by Drew Lock. It's really crazy when you take a look at Drew Lock's overall logs in 2020 and realize just how inaccurate he was. So you guys can see it on the screen, but his expected points added was negative 30 or nearly negative 37, negative 37, which was 78th league wide. And his number 33 true passer rating really shows how bad he was. I mean, he had the 33rd true passer rating despite having a 1.84 average receiver target separation, which ranked 4th league wide. To make this easily more digestible for you, because I know there's a lot of lingo if you're not used to it, but I'll sum it up like this. Receivers were getting open, receivers were separating, and Locke still couldn't hit them. The biggest problem that people will put on Jeudy himself, again, I just mentioned the poor quarterback play, but what does Jeudy have to improve on as a player himself? It was the drop rate. I mean, we're talking about a guy who dropped 8 balls and in general was not the most clean, most consistent player in terms of his hands in 2020. But I'm willing to look past that. I'm willing to see a player, a receiver that can build off of what was overall, apart from the drops, a successful rookie campaign. And when you take in the fact that his 965 unrealized air yards ranked 2nd league wide, it really goes to show you how much Drew Lock was missing him down the field. And PFF does a really good job at summing up 2020 for Jeudy, as you guys can see on the screen. Their receiver had a higher rate of their targets, result in a quarterback fault incompletion this season than Jerry Jeudy, which is just really insane when you think about it. But anyways, if you need more proof as to Jeudy's ability to separate and get open down the field, and one that unfortunately should have led to more points in 2020, Matt Harmon does a great job outlining just how successful Jerry Jeudy was on his routes in 2020, and particularly hails his uncanny ability to separate from man coverage that we typically don't see from a rookie. This really is a result of what we saw from him as a prospect. We're talking about a guy with an incredible line of scrimmage release package and nuanced route running to really get away from opposing cornerbacks. But you guys can see he ranked in the 87th percentile against man coverage and 75th percentile against press. And according to Harmon himself, the data would tell us it would be a true upset if a player like this doesn't have a breakout season at some point in his NFL career. I'm not just mentioning in his NFL career. I'm mentioning Jerry Jeudy as the breakout this year. And I know it's obvious. I know people have already said this multiple times, but that classic "he was better on tape" narrative is one that really truly defines Jeudy. He was consistently open. He was getting valuable targets we look for down the field, evidenced by his 27.27% deep target rate, which was 2nd amongst wide receivers with 100+ targets in the league. But now we enter Teddy Bridgewater, with whom we've already seen Jerry Jeudy making training camp reports as developing a connection with. Again, take this with a grain of salt. I usually, for the most part, take training camp reports with a grain of salt. But really, in this instance, it's at least refreshing to see that a consistent separator like Jeudy is already getting the looks and the consistent trust from Bridgewater, who was objectively better than Locke last year. As you guys can see on the screen, I mean, his EPA was much higher at 58.3, 18th league-wide. We're talking about his overall receiving target separation not even being close to what Locke's was last year. Talking about the deep ball completion rate being 13th. Teddy Bridgewater is a much improved version of what we wanted Drew Lock to be last year, and I do believe he will help stabilize this offense. The main argument of other people is going to be, well, okay, maybe the quarterback play is improved, but how does the impact of Courtland Sutton coming back have on Jerry Jeudy's overall target output? I mean, we're talking about a guy as a rookie had 113 targets, but Sutton's return will affect the status of ancillary weapons in this offense. In particular, we're talking about guys like Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler. We're not talking about Jerry Jeudy. The addition of Sutton back and Bridgewater in the offense actually helps Jeudy tremendously. This offense should be able to move at a much more efficient and consistent rate than it was operating at last year with Locke at the helm. And as we saw just last year, Bridgewater was able to manage and support 3 top 30 wide receivers at a consistent rate last year on the Carolina Panthers, despite only averaging 32.8 passing attempts per game. Meanwhile, last year in Denver, Drew Lock attempted nearly 36.5 passing attempts per game, and games he played the majority of snaps. I took out one game sample where he only completed 5, and that's because he got hurt in that game. So Teddy should be fine. He's a much more accurate and much more consistent support source for Jerry Jeudy and this offense overall to thrive. And call me bold right now, I actually think both hit that 1,000-yard plateau this year with Teddy Bridgewater slinging them the rock. So at least on paper, they are a better duo than what Teddy Bridgewater was working with Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore in Carolina. So overall, I think that Jeudy currently going in the 8th round, in terms of both his talent and opportunity facing him, I could see an Amari Cooper or Calvin Ridley level ascension. I mean, we're talking about guys who are buttery separators that truly unlocked their potential once they had consistent quarterback play. While he may be a quote-unquote riskier option at the wide receiver position comparatively to options available in this range, he's still one that I believe is closer to that 1,100-yard, I can't believe I stole him train of thought. And for a wide receiver 37 overall cost, I'm all in on projecting Jeudy to truly have that breakout we were looking for when the Broncos made him that 15th pick. But anyway, we can finally end off this video with the last player, or should I say last duo, and that's going to be T. Higgins and Joe Burrow. Since both of these talented cats are sophomores and coming from the same Cincinnati franchise, I figured I would just group them together when talking about a potential breakout. And on the screen right now, you guys can see highlighted games where T. Higgins and Joe Burrow both play together. T. Higgins averaged 14.74 PPR points per game in the stretch, which would rank wide receiver 22 across a full season amongst wide receivers who played 10-plus games. And you can see Jack Miller himself also tweeted this out that in general, his points per game, his efficiency, and his targets per game were both substantially higher when Joe Burrow was in the game. In the same vein, we're talking about Burrow, who was averaging 40 passing attempts per game on the season when he played. And here's how Higgins did when Burrow was able to help him make babies down the field. We were talking about a guy who had 26.67% of his targets being deep, 20-plus yards down the field, which is actually 3rd amongst wide receivers with 100-plus targets. And his 20th ranking in terms of yards per route run versus man coverage was equally as impressive as a rookie. Again, Higgins wasn't just this quote-unquote byproduct of the system. He showed he could be a very good outside wide receiver for a team that needed consistent play on the outside. Well, the main bugaboo for a lot of people affecting Higgins is the introduction of Jamar Chase into this offense. Let's not forget that the Bengals vacate on 104 vacated targets from A.J. Green's departure, and Higgins' role on the offense is much harder to supplement targets to Chase's arrival rather than the lower A-dot Boyd's would be. So when we're talking about Higgins, we're talking about a receiver who put up 980 receiving yards as a rookie and held a near 1,120-yard pace with Burrow in those weeks 2 to 11. And he's currently being decimated in ADP over what should be a net neutral arrival from a targets perspective, and one that actually increases the overall output and level of play of the offense. Will he undoubtedly outperform Chase in 2020? No. It's plausible to view Chase as the number 1, given his connection with Burrow in 2019, and given the prospect profile he has coming in as the number 5 overall pick. Does he need to be a true alpha wide receiver in order to produce? Not at all. For a team that threw the ball at the overall pace they were at when Burrow was in the game, it truly doesn't matter about arguing over a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 observation. This is a team I see can honestly supplement 3 1,000-yard wide receivers with their lack of competition of targets from other positions, with 308 of Burrow's 404 total passing attempts coming to the wide receiver position, and their overall team structure. In Higgins, I really see a guy that can play as a Marvin Jones to Jamar Chase's Kenny Golladay, and that's only on an offense that should have much higher expected passing output than what we've seen from the Lions in recent years. So the main rebuttal I hear in terms of hesitancy and projecting the Bengals for a high voltage passing attack is their 56% neutral run rate when Joe Mixon was on the field. Despite this, we're still talking about an offense that actually threw at a high rate when Mixon was on the field, as you guys can see, 41 passing attempts per game. And we're talking about a natural adjustment to increase the pass rate, considering the fact that these 6 games were coincidentally Burrow's first 6 games in the NFL. So a natural transition from a run percentage was always expected to get Burrow under grips on this NFL offense. So overall, I mean, now let's shift to Burrow. And basically, we outlined the majority of the potential breakout when we're talking about Higgins' breakout. But in fantasy football as a whole, we either target Konami code quarterbacks or quarterbacks with insane projected passing volume. And while the former may not happen to Burrow, the latter is all blocked in for this Bengals golden ticket to have a true high passing volume type of season. I mean, we're talking about a player, despite a makeshift offensive line and losing his top back 6 games in, was still somewhat productive despite a slew of negative situations around him as a rookie. Now he's back healthy for an offensive line that had Riley Reif and a new offensive line coach in Frank Pollock that really can help create their identity back that we saw in 2019 when he was the offensive line coach, and also adds Jamar Chase to an already solid wide receiver core to turn it to a great one, and Joe Mixon back to help keep defenses honest. Burrow is really set to enter that rarefied era as a passer, and I'm willing to pivot to him as a late round quarterback option. I mean, we're talking about a guy that by NFL draft time or fantasy draft time should be figuring into that round 11, round 12 range. I know his ADP is a little higher on Underdog, but that's simply because of the stackability that he offers you on that type of platform. And given the fact that you're competing with so many people, stacking, as you guys will see in the Best Ball Strategies video, is one of the most easily translatable towards winning. So anyways, honorable mentions of this video. Let's talk a little bit about Brandon Aiyuk. Not going to go too in depth because, again, we talked about him 2 days ago, but very efficient wide receiver, true X for that San Francisco 49ers passing offense. He should be in store for a huge build off of his rookie season. Michael Pittman, again, a guy that we've talked about all offseason, but figures into be that true number 1 for the Colts. So we'll see how that transpires. But we've seen Carson Wentz with his type of archetype perform in the past. Talking about the Alshon Jeffries in particular. And finally, let's talk about Darnell Mooney, the main benefactor of Justin Fields coming in. Again, I don't know how many people need to tell you the fact that Darnell Mooney was the subject of poor quarterback play in 2020. But every time you're watching a Bears team, this guy was open down the field and he was getting missed by a mile. Hopefully, Justin Fields is able to combat that. So anyways, that being said, if you made it this far in the video, comment breakout down below. With all these sophomores poised to break out, it's only fitting that you support the FSE breakout with your interaction down below. Again, that's talking about liking, subscribing for more quality content. And again, we'll see you tomorrow where we are joined by Hayden Winks of Underdog Fantasy to talk some best ball. Anyways, peace out, y'all.